Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of I'm Apostolic Not Confused. And today we're going to be talking about why we believe in the flood and not evolution. Are you ready?
Yep.
Let's get started.
I'm Apostolic, Not Confused. Real talk for apostolic teens with Jayla Dixon.
Okay, why do we believe that the flood actually happened?
We believe the flood actually happened because the Bible says so, and Jesus also believed it. In Genesis 6 through 9, he gives a very detailed account about the whole flood, and Jesus himself confirmed that it was real when he said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days," in Matthew 24:37 through 39. And we also believe that it happened because there's physical evidence all around us, and it's confirmed through science and all of history. We see a flood. When fossils are made, we were just learning this in my class, actually, my biology class. When fossils are made, there are certain elements and things that have to happen, and one of them being rapid burial. They cannot be buried very slowly because there will be decay, and there will also be things that will come and eat them and other things like that. And so if there was a flood, that would qualify as rapid burial. Fossils don't slowly form. They need quick burial, and they need a certain sediment and vitamins that the water from the flood would have provided. The fossil record as we know it, you can see huge things and animals that should not be in mountains, like jellyfish or things like that are in the mountains. And if there was a flood, then we could obviously see where the land animals and the ocean animals would get mixed in and covered with sediment, becoming fossils together. Throughout history, there are many global flood legends. Lots of people talk about there being a flood. Obviously the details aren't all the same because of word to mouth and passing it down through generations, but mostly the stories are the same. They always talk about some kind of way of escape, how humanity survived, and it also talks about a giant flood that wiped out everything and not just small areas. And if that many people in all of ancient history have stories, then it wasn't by accident that they accidentally had all these stories in common. Another thing is there's rock layers across continents. You can trace matching rocks and sediment through entire continents and even across oceans. And this doesn't make sense to most scientists unless you have a biblical flood, because then it would make sense, obviously, because the flood waters would bring the rock over into the other continents or the other places. This points to a very giant worldwide flood that could cause both the animals' rapid burial and the rock layers. If someone asks you why you believe that, you can say there's way too much worldwide evidence, not just in the United States or Europe or Germany, worldwide, everywhere, to let it be a myth. There's too much for it to just be a story. And also, if they say besides Genesis, where in the Bible does it talk about it, Jesus says that they're in the days of Noah, and if Noah wasn't there, then the flood wouldn't have happened.
So why don't we believe in the evolution of man?
This is a big topic for most scientists because the reason that they reject the biblical worldview is because they believe in the evolution of man, and a lot of times because they believe in the evolution of man, they reject the biblical worldview. So they have very circular knowledge when it comes to the science and God. And so, first of all, we don't believe in evolution because the Bible says that we were created in God's image. And God's not a monkey, so obviously we were not made like that, and we didn't evolve. In Genesis 1:27, it says, God created man in his own image. And in Genesis 2:7, it says, formed a man from the dust and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So it clearly shows us how we were made. We were not made by evolving from monkeys. And in 1 Corinthians 15:39, it tells us that all flesh is not the same. Not all humans, all flesh is not the same. God made kinds, not species, that morph into other species. There's lots of problems with evolution that a lot of evolutionary people don't speak about because they can't answer them. They claim that they have missing links that show men becoming apes or apes becoming men, but realistically they do not at all. They actually, most of the time the media will cause the ape-like skeletons to look more human-like and the human-like skeletons to look more ape-like, just to show the missing link. The transitional fossils that they need in order to show that we did that are completely missing and not there at all. And so another thing that is missing is the law of entropy. It's the second law of thermodynamics, and this law talks about things breaking down over time. And so clearly things cannot become complex. So the evolutionary idea goes against the laws of science, and a theory cannot stand strong if it goes against laws or cannot be repeated. And so when those things cannot be seen with your eye and cannot be proven, then a theory cannot hold up at all. If it's going against the science as we know it, then the theory is completely unethical and doesn't make any sense. Another thing, basically evolution tries to say is that we all came from a accidental evolution, but that doesn't make sense because, as we know, things don't get more complex, they get less complex. And the only way that you can bridge the gap between things getting complex and uncomplex is intelligence. And so I heard the example of, so if you have a painting or you have a blueprint, that is a representation of whatever you're trying to build. But you say you want to build it into a house. A blueprint doesn't build itself. It needs someone intelligent, someone with being able to create and makes it into a house. That's how you bridge the gap. But it cannot do that itself, and a house doesn't make itself into a blueprint. Someone needs to draw that blueprint. Another thing that evolutionary people don't really talk about is micro versus macro evolution, because microevolution is animals adapting with species. So we see if there was a bunch of rabbits living in Antarctica and they were short-haired, and then they started breeding with long-haired, they would start breeding because it's so cold, their short hair isn't good for survival. And so that's microevolution, but not one species evolving into another. And so we don't see fishes turning into monkeys or things like that. They try to say everything's related, but it's really not. And that's honestly, it takes more faith to believe that I came from a monkey than to believe that God created me. So yeah. And so when they ask you that, you can say, I don't believe that I came from monkeys. I believe that the Bible God created me with a purpose, and science shows we're way too complex to be an accident. And so the last thing is
why this matters for our faith.
This matters for our faith. A lot of people will be like, oh, well, no, God could have used evolution. God didn't use evolution because in the Bible, clearly he never said I will make you an ape and then you'll turn into a human. Like, that doesn't make sense. He clearly says that he made him Adam from the dirt and formed him. And so another thing Lily will try to tell you is, what if the time periods in the Bible in Genesis were long millions of years? That's not possible either, because he clearly uses the words morning and night and evening, and in the Hebrew translation, or the original Hebrew, it talks about how they are actually like morning, and it's strictly the morning that as we know it, not any morning of millions of years. Also, if Genesis is a lie, then everything else around it falls apart, including sin, salvation, and the gospel. And so the Bible is either all true or none of it is true. You can't pick and choose what you believe. Believing in creation and the flood is believing in God's power, His judgment, and His mercy. And so if you don't believe in any of that, or you don't believe in what the Bible is telling you and you only want to choose certain things, then your whole faith falls apart. And so believing the flood isn't ignoring science, it's trusting the Bible and realizing that sometimes people want to take God out of things because they don't want to be accountable and they don't want to have to answer to anybody. And they would rather take God out and fill it with time because they believe that time can fix anything. And so they add millions of years in order to take God out. So that is it for today's points, and